Hey everybody. It is Sunday morning, almost afternoon. And now this weekend is officially ISTJ weekend. Here's sticking up there. Okay. Um, and I say that because I posted a video last night on my Elon Musk, in my opinion, is an ISTJ, not an INTJ or an ENTJ, but feel free to watch that video and tell me if you agree or not, even though I said don't at me, but you can at me. Okay. But sort of in a moment of another moment of synchronicity, got a interesting comment from somebody who did one of the or did the polar test on my video about doing the different polar function tests, where I go through the different functions and try to come up with some little task or question set of questions to see, how much you can get pushed on a particular issue, and to the extent it's hard or annoying, or you don't want to focus that much on that particular question. The argument being, that's sort of your polar function. Um, and then on the sort of flip of that would be, tasks that come relatively easy to you without having to put a whole lot of effort into it are probably, somewhere in your dominant or secondary function. So check that video out if you're interested. But and if you're interested, maybe you don't want to watch the rest of this video, because I'm going to go into sort of detail about what the different questions we're getting at and whatnot. And it's probably best if you didn't know that before doing it. So okay. Or at least like you can't crib off of somebody else's answers, I guess is the better point. Okay. So I got a response from an ISTJ, and um, they sort of wrote out their take on some of the questions, and whether it was sort of easy, effortless, or difficult slash annoying, and it's just a great summary of being an ISTJ. It really is. And so um, I'll put a link to it in down below if I remember. So here, and it's a good example because it does both shows what the ISTJ is going to think is quote unquote easy, or what they could do with very little effort, versus what they see as, either annoying or something that takes maybe a little bit more effort than it might for other types. So let's sort of go through it. So and I think it's important to point out that they hadn't watched part two yet. So part one is just sort of the list of questions, and then part two is me sort of explaining what I'm getting at with the various questions. And so um, to me, that makes it even, more telling that that they're not just sort of watching the second video and spitting back what they think I want to hear. I mean, it really is, as far as I could tell, a legitimate reaction to the first one. Okay, so they point out that the easiest was for them to do what was the SI question, and that was just sort of recalling going to a grocery store and giving details about what did you buy, what in what order did you pick them up in the store, what kind of information can you tell me about the person who checked you out, that kind of thing. And this person said, it's by far the easiest question. No effort at all to remember the items and do it in reverse order. So again, doing it in reverse order. So, being able to recall what order you picked up the items, but do it backwards, to me is sort of getting at whether or not you can use that information flexibly. And if you can use it flexibly, it shows that it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to not only bring it back up into consciousness, but sort of work with it while it's in there. Okay, I have a good memory of the cashier, despite not actually paying attention. to her appearance while I was there. Again, if you're a lead SI like an ISTJ, you probably don't have. You probably think of yourself as not paying attention to, um, sort of SI type of stuff or stuff that ends up being in your SI. But that's kind of the point, right? That you don't have to spend a whole lot of energy focusing your attention on it. Your attention is just sort of naturally sitting there, right? And so you don't have this sort of metacognitive feeling of, oh, I really have to focus on this thing. Like it's just there, right? Where if you're maybe SI polar or SI is sort of down in your function stack, and you're going to have to remember that information later, right? Then, that person might have to focus a lot harder, right? To be able to sort of bring it up later. Um, so, so that's an interesting point. So she or he said that they didn't have to spend any conscious attention to her. Hard to explain just by doing the shopping trip, all this irrelevant information, like the appearance of the cashier, just stays in my brain and can be easily recalled. Exactly. Right. It's like you don't have to devote a whole lot of attentional resource for that stuff to stay there. And I hope that it explains a lot, right? Where people with introverted sensing, either in their dominant function or their auxiliary function, they're the ones when you talk to them, they will just, like, tell me about your day. They will tell you what happened. I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. Then I ran into this person, and they said this, and I said no way, and they said yes way, and then I went to this, and then I went to that, and this place wasn't open, so I went. It is just a series of events that just comes automatically, right? And it's not like during the day they're just like, jotting down notes like, okay, I got to remember I did this, and then I got to remember I did that. And I would argue that what your brain is doing, when you're sort of re-engaging your sort of episodic memory of the events of the day, your brain is trying to lay all that information down and find out sort of the relevant information that you may need for later, and sort of tag it with sort of an FI type thing, right? I might need this information for later. Um, and by, talking about your day, you're just sort of bringing it back up and bringing it back into mental activity. And those people who study memory in the brain, there's this idea of consolidation, where your brain just sort of brings back up events to sort of solidify them in memory, right? Because the more it sort of fires those neurons that are associated with that event, the connections between the neurons get stronger, and then they start connecting to other things and sort of linking those events to other events. And that's how you sort of build up your, representational network in your brain. And so SI is going to do that, right? It's going to send you back through your day to sort of tag things as being important versus non-important. And it's all, what you feel is important. The person you're talking to might be like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or, they might not be as interested in it, but a lot of it is just your brain wants to sort of regenerate that information so it can tag it and organize it. And in a lot of ways, the person you're talking to is just sort of a sounding board, right? And you actually see it in dreaming too, right? Or in sleep, where somebody will sleep and you'll start seeing their patterns of memory sort of coming back up. And so the argument is, when you sleep, a lot of the consolidation gets done there. So real interesting phenomenon. And I think it explains a lot, both about, personality or psychological types and cognitive functions like SI, but it also sort of helps you understand just the way the brain is working, especially in you SI dominant types. Okay, enough of that. Then they go on to say the second easiest was the furniture question and the postmaster reducing the budget. Okay, so again, these were the TE tasks. Can you tell me instructions on how to put together furniture in 6 steps? Okay, and now can you do it in 4 steps, right? So TE again is about process. It's about figuring out the ordinal steps to get from point A to point B or point Z, and and in the non-social domain. So dealing with objects, dealing with systems, dealing with spatial information, that kind of stuff. Anything that's other than people, because people are weird and we have our own little brain area for that. That's the FE part. But for the TE part, it's about process. It's about going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And being able to do it in 6 steps and then reduce it down to 4 steps, again, is what I'm trying to get at is, can you do that flexibly, right? Can you do it in different ways, in different angles, but still accomplish the task? And other people have commented, that are probably TE polar, or TEs sort of down there in their stack, have commented like, oh my God, it was hard enough to come up with 6 steps. And then when you said 4 steps, I'm just like, and that's the point, right? If you're TE polar, like me, it's like I wouldn't be able to write out the first 6 steps, right? Like if I really thought about it, I probably could. But I'm certainly not going to like it. It's certainly not going to come without effort. And then reducing it from 6 to 4, like whatever. Okay. But somebody who, is dominant TE or, secondary TE, it's just going to come to them probably pretty naturally. Same thing for the postmaster task. Can you just come up with ways to make the process more efficient or to save money on the budget? Again, this is just sort of using your TE in a flexible way to figure out new ways to get get whatever the logistics of some sort of system to work better, to work more efficiently, or to be able to take things away from it but still have it work, that kind of stuff. And again, it's just sort of using your TE in a flexible way and doing it without having to rely on other people to tell you what to do. That's the FE part. Doing it on your own is the important thing. Okay, so far so good. We're batting 1,000 here, because SI seemed to be pretty easy, dominant. TE seemed to be pretty effortless, secondary. They put out I could probably fit the task into any number of steps if required. Yeah, I get it. That's TE. When I think of doing a task, my brain immediately goes to, okay, to get this thing done, well, first do this, then that. Yeah, right. That's TE. Your brain consciously coming up with an ordinal process, as opposed to the TE polar types. And I've used this analogy before, like, you're given this piece of furniture that you have to put together, right? And there's instructions, but those of us who are sort of TE polar, and there's probably some NI component to this too, we just look at it and say, oh, well, all those pieces should fit together like this, right? Without thinking like, you do this one first, then you do this one, then you do this one. You're just like, well, this seems to go with this, and this seems to go with that. And before you know it, you've like skipped a step, or you put something on backwards, and then you gotta redo everything. And you try to follow the instructions, and they just make no sense to you, or at least to me. I don't know. I don't mean to ascribe this to everybody, but it's just in my personal experience, that's how TE just sort of manifests itself. And so we, again, we have this sort of holistic picture of it, right? That, okay, I'm at point A and I'm going to get to point Z. So all I need to do is go straight from point A to point Z, and all the other stuff in between will just sort of work itself out without thinking like, okay, go A to B to C to D, so on and so forth. Okay, so they make a good point of, that's just the way their brain thinks of it. It's just naturally how I go about doing things. So listing steps come naturally, right? So making checklists, making lists of things you got to do today. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Um, very TE process. Again, very little effort, but maybe a hair more than the grocery store. Okay, that would make sense. If it's secondary as opposed to dominant. Okay, what I dislike in the kitchen. So this was the question. This was like a FI type question. What do you like about your kitchen? What kind of preference do you put in things? And I've said in other videos that this was probably not an ideal question. I'll have to come up with a better one, mainly because it didn't really occur to me that people might be living in like their parents' house or renting a place or something where there's just not really much you could do about the kitchen, so you don't really pay attention to it. But point being, can you come up with things that you like versus dislike, and how many? If you're a really strong FI user, you're just going to rattle off like a million things that you like or dislike. Where if FI is, sort of not really up there in the top, you can do it, but it probably takes a little bit more effort. I've actually got some other FI tests that I'm thinking of doing, so maybe I'll put those out there. So, again, the fact that they're sort of coming up with a third, they say it was quite easy. Okay. An ISTJ is going to have, third slot FI. And again, that's the one that I like to say that, your third function, especially as you get older, is the one you sort of pat yourself on the back about when you do it. You feel pretty good about it, right? So the INFJs love it when we figure out a TI thing and we pat ourselves on the back and make sure everybody knows about it. And FI is going to be like that for the ISTJ, where when they do it, they're pretty proud of doing it, or they're pretty proud of what they're sort of generating out of that function. And so this is why INTJs especially, and ISTJs can be very opinionated, right? About, what they think of a particular band or what they think of a particular movie, and almost in a very stubborn way, right? And so the song comes on the radio. Oh, I hate the song. And they're not really going to get too deep into, what makes them hate it or what makes them like it or anything, but they'll certainly let you know their opinion. And so yeah, and so in that respect, they could sort of come across as being sort of feelers in a way, but it's not sort of setting out goals and preferences and in the way that real strong FI users do it. It's more third function. And it's more like they come up with a quick answer, and they like it or they don't like it, and they can give you some reasons, but they don't get too deep into it. So does it surprise me that this would come quite easy, to quote the commenter here? I found the hardest question. So this to me, this is what sort of triggered me to want to do this video, because this is just such an ISTJ answer. If you really want to understand an ISTJ, like there's no better answer than this response. It's almost like somebody knew exactly what I was thinking and just wrote it out. It's crazy. Okay, so here's what they said. I found the hardest question to be the returning $100 to a friend, and actually couldn't come up with an answer, and wrote, can't relate. I would never get myself into a situation where I borrowed $100 and didn't prepare in advance to return it by the time we agreed upon. Okay, so let me break this down because there's a lot to unpack. It's such a good response. Or it's so illustrative, right, or demonstrative of an ISTJ. So first of all, they had just sort of difficulty with the question. And just to back up, in an ISTJ, FE is going to be polar, and this is an FE question. And I particularly like this question because it's not necessarily what you typically hear about FE being like creating harmony and making everybody happy and feel comfortable and all that kind of stuff. Yes, that's part of FE, but it's not the only thing that it's doing. What I'd argue is FE is doing social navigation, right? You've got some sort of social problem that you need to address, and you need to interact and engage with people in order to sort of, again, get from point A to point Z. So where TE is getting from point A to point Z in, building objects or building systems or running a system or running logistics, that kind of stuff. That's going to be very TE, object oriented, system oriented, where FE is trying to get from point A to point Z, but in the social domain, right? And you need a different brain system because it's a different type of information. Where in the object world, it's very linear. Objects typically stay the same. Where anybody who gets a table from IKEA, assuming all the parts are there and everything, like everybody's going to follow the same steps, right? The tables don't change, and it's a very fixed ordinal process. But people, when you're dealing with people, I mean, at the very least, you've got 16 different personality types, right? And you just have to understand the person's motivation. You have to understand, if I say this, they're going to react like this, or they're this type of person and they're going to get really mad, or no, this person's a total pushover. I could say whatever and they're going to be fine with it. And just dealing with those sort of case by case dynamics, like our brain evolved a whole different system to deal with what I call the nonlinear dynamics of dealing with people. And not only that, but like you have to sort of react in the moment, right? Where you say something and then they say something back, and then you got to think, okay, well, how do I sort of salvage this situation if it's not going the way you intended? And that's all very FE type of stuff. Okay. So the ISTJs and the INTJs are going to be FE polar, where that interpersonal social dynamic engagement is just, it takes a lot of effort. And, for somebody where it's polar. And I would argue that, they try to create a situation where they just don't even have to deal with it, right? And we all do that with our polar function. We'd rather just live our lives in a way where we just don't have to deal with whatever sorry, I'm just checking my stream here. The function is, right? Or the task at hand is. And go watch my polar shifting videos and you'll see what I'm talking about there. Okay. Okay, so let's continue unpacking this. So first of all, they really just couldn't come up with an answer, right? Where, sort of a lead FE or secondary FE type person, they're going to think of 100 different ways of dealing with the person, right? And and a lot of it's going to be, well, it sort of depends on the person and blah, 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 blah. But, here's what I do. Here's what I'd say to try to smooth over the situation. Because, buy myself more time or make them feel better about the situation or whatever. But the other thing is, in this question, a lot of people could switch it into a TE type question, like, I'll go rob a liquor store or I'll sell something online to raise $100. And so instead of having to deal with the person, instead of having to go to the friend and say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't pay you the $100, they'll, find some TE way of raising the $100 so they don't have to deal with that FE problem, or they're going to deal with the FE problem in a very TE manner. Where if you're more of an FE dominant or secondary, your brain is probably going to automatically go to like, okay, what do I need to say to this person to sort of smooth things out and, make sure that I'm not screwing up the friendship or whatever. If you're more of an FI type, you might be thinking more along the lines of getting the person to sort of feel sorry for you, like oh, I had a really rough week, and I thought I was going to have the $100, but then this happened and that happened. And don't you feel sorry for me? Aren't I really the main victim here? And so that would be more of an FI way of approaching it. But the FE way of approaching it, would just be trying to figure out, okay, how can I, make it up to this person? Hey, I don't have the $100, but I'll watch your dog when you're out of town, or I'll come and water your plants. Like, I'll make it up to you somehow. Like, I just want to preserve the relationship here and make sure we're all square. Or, can you give me another week? All that kind of FE type of, social dynamic stuff. Okay. So then I also found the highlight of this, right? Like the capstone, the crown jewel of the answer is such an ISTJ thing. Like, why would I ever put myself in a situation where I owed somebody $100 and couldn't pay them back? Okay. and yes, I get it. I totally understand why an ISTJ or an INTJ would come up with that response, because the last thing they want to have to do is deal with some bullshit FE problem when they could have planned ahead and completely avoided the FE thing. And so my response to that is like, welcome to FE. Welcome to the world of dominant FE users or secondary FE users, where we just sort of do things and assume like, hey, we'll work it out if we need to. And and we'll convince whoever it is that to give us more time or whatever, because we have that sort of arrow in our quiver. And yeah, all things being equal, it would be great if you had the $100, but we know that in our arrow of quivers of tools that we can use, if we ever need to use it, we can pull out that FE and smooth out the situation. And so where with an ISTJ or an INTJ, again, they're just going to want to avoid putting themselves in that situation in the first place, right? Like, why would I ever put myself in a situation where I like have to rely on my FE to smooth things out with somebody? And that's why ISTJs are just like the best, like, in the business world, and just the best workers, because they don't put themselves into these situations where they have to work on diplomacy or politics or anything. They just do their job, and they do it very reliably. And I think a lot of it, now that I sort of think about it, this answer is, or response is making me think about it. A lot of it is just like, you want to be reliable, you want to be competent, you want to do the job that you're being asked to do. Yeah, just because that's the right thing to do, and that's just sort of the way your brain works. But B, you kind of know somewhere in your unconscious or somewhere in the back of your mind that if you screw up, you're going to have to deal with somebody, right? And you're going to have to like smooth out the situation because you kind of let somebody down, right? And so now you have to get into the politics of it. So I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, but it just, that's sort of the essence of what I got out of that. So I love the response. It's such an ISTJ response. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, welcome. You don't get a whole lot of ISTJs in MBTI world. Mainly, I just argue mainly because a lot of people don't see the practicality of it. I personally do, but like, how can you actually apply this and make it work in the real world? Which of course the ISTJs are going to be looking for. And obviously MBTI and all that kind of stuff, because it's so sort of wishy-washy and people have different opinions of what makes an ENTJ versus an ISTJ versus an INFJ. And it's just a lot of, mental gymnastics and, academic sort of theorizing. And the ISTJs just they don't want to deal with that. Just tell me what an ENTJ is, or tell me what an ISTJ is, or tell me what an ISFJ is, and what I need to do with them to make them sort of do what they're supposed to do, right? Um, and that's what the MBTI was originally intended to be, right? Like we've got this objective way, this inventory of telling you, okay, they're this type or they're that type, and then you put them into this slot and just let them run, right? But instead, now it's just become this whole, area of discourse, right? Where we all have our little pet theories and our little ways of breaking down the different functions and the different types. And, and hopefully people are getting some sort of synthesized information out of that and coming up with something useful for themselves. But again, the ISTJ is just like, hey, just give me the answer. Tell me what this person is and what I do with them. Okay. So welcome. I'd certainly appreciate your thoughts on everything, because the ISTJs, ESTJs are going to give a very, very different perspective on all this stuff, which is good, which is a good thing. Okay, going on. Another one that was not easy nor hard, just more annoying. Okay, good. That's the point. Was making the definitions from all the other people's perspectives. Okay, so this was the NI type question where, it was like define the word justice, and now define it from the perspective of like a Catholic priest, or from somebody from China, or somebody from the old West in the 1800s, where they might have different sort of things that they think are quote unquote justice, or things that they focus on, right? I'm going to do another video on this, but more specifically, but I actually put this into Chat GPT, and I was blown away. Like Chat GPT, I was like, give me the definition of justice from a Catholic priest perspective, or what would a Catholic priest define justice as? And they Chat GPT just lays out this whole like moral argument, and how they would focus on the morals, and how justice is sort of like a reflection of the divine will of God, and all this stuff, where it's like, whoa, right? And it was kind of exactly what I was getting at, and I was really impressed, to be honest. Where then you ask, okay, how would a cowboy define it? And they give you a very different, like, their system of justice is to sort of create stability, law and order in sort of an orderless area. So they might focus more on things like property rights, that kind of stuff. And it was just really good. It was, it was like reading like a term paper from, a philosophy student or something. It was just incredible. So anyways, so that's what I'm getting at with the NI question, is like, can you look at it from different perspectives? Yes, it's the same word. And you would like to think that a word would have a definition, but words like justice, where there's sort of this embedded meaning, where the way you define it depends on where you're coming from, right? Different societies might have very different concepts of what constitutes justice, or what they see as being justice. And so, yes, same word, and yes, they're all trying to get at something, right? They're trying to sort of keep society running and civil, but they would focus maybe on different things depending on, what their society focuses on. And so the SI versus NI breakdown, SI, again, SI wants more sort of concrete information, right? Like, the word justice has a definition, right? Whatever's in the dictionary, that's the definition. And where NI is trying to create patterns or links or associations between concepts, right? So, there's sort of this fundamental essence, like this platonic ideal of justice, but it gets linked to different things, right? It gets linked to different societies. It gets linked to different things that societies or different cultures see as important versus non-important, that kind of thing. And so NI is going to make those sort of associations where you can see it from different perspectives, um, because you're linking it to different concepts, right? It's not its own concrete, discrete thing. Where an ISTJ in particular, and maybe an ISFJ, lead SI types, they want information to be reliable and stable, and to be able to use it in a reliable and stable way. And when you start telling them that things like the word justice depends on where you're coming from, or it can have different definitions in different contexts, that is no longer reliable or stable information. That's just a bunch of wishy-washy stuff, right? Um, so it's very important when, anybody dealing with the ISTJ or ISFJ to understand, like, the importance of reliability and stability when it comes to information, because SI is not just about recalling the events, recalling the information, but like I've said in other videos, you tag that information with an emotional label, like your emotional system, like your hippocampus, your amygdala, your basal ganglia, everything that's in sort of your limbic system, it fires up when you bring up these episodic memories. And these areas are normally thought of as emotional systems, but what they're doing is somehow or another, they're sort of tagging this information, or when you recall an experience, you're not only recalling sort of the events that happen, but you're recalling how you felt at the moment, right? And it's allowing you to tag information that in memory and representations with this sort of, emotional coding, right? Like, this thing made me feel happy. This thing made me feel sad. This thing made me feel comfortable. This thing made me feel uncomfortable. And so because of that, in SI, that's why, people want SI memory to be comfortable in the sense of reliable and stable. Because if it's all over the place and doesn't have just like, a concrete specific definition, then what do I tag it with, right? Like, what sort of emotional tag do I give to it? Where NI is, I don't want to say it's devoid of those emotional tags, but people with strong NI are perfectly happy or content with a theory that might not pan out, right? And it's sort of an association we made or a pattern that we made, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, and we're perfectly happy with that, right? And a lot of times, sometimes we'll get a little too dedicated to our theories, but as you sort of grow up and progress, you'll start coming comfortable with, like, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, let's test it out. um or somebody coming to you with a different perspective on, like, how they define justice, or how they define truth, or how they define liberty, these sort of big abstract concepts. We don't see it as irritating, we see it as interesting, right? Oh, I never really thought about it that way. Where maybe a heavy SI user is like, oh, that's not jibing with the way I think about it. And so you have a very different definition than I do. Um, so very interesting response here, because they point out that it wasn't necessarily hard, it was just annoying. And that to me, so NI would be in their A slot, right? And that to me sort of is indicative of something being in the A slot, where, yeah, I could do it, but if you really push me on it, I'm going to get annoyed, right? And I don't want to be put on the spot having to do it. Okay. I can't explain why I started getting annoyed by the end of the definitions and wanted it to end, other than maybe I feel like the definition is a single defined definition and the person's perspective is irrelevant to the meaning of the word, right? So again, looking for a concrete defined definition, right? Like the word definition means defined, right? It's got boundaries, it's got borders. It is a defined concept, it's a defined representation where an NI user is going to be like, well, that's just in general. It might have a defined boundary, it might have a defined representation, but it's going to be linked to all these other things. And there's sort of a broader way of looking at it. There's a wider network of information that we can tie to it to really understand the true essence of the definition, right? Looking at it from these different perspectives. So I think I made the point. Don't mean to hammer it too much, but very, very, very interesting response. It just, again, like if somebody said like act like an ISTJ and write out a response, I'd probably write out this response, which makes me think like maybe somebody out there is just totally trolling me, and that's cool. It was still illustrative. Okay, but hopefully, it's genuine, authentic, real ISTJ, because it is such a good example of how their different functions work, and not only that, but their ability to sort of articulate like what annoys them and why it annoys them is to be just spot on. Okay, so I'm gonna try to put a link down to it, and I'm interested in hearing everybody else's thoughts as well. Okay, talk to everybody later. Bye.